Hey, yeah. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, whenever it is that you may be receiving, taking a look at this video. Um, Welcome to, gosh, what week are we in? I think I want to say week 6 of the course, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's week 6. The semester is moving quickly. It always does, although this one seems to be moving more quickly than most. I've haven't had a chance to really look at. I guess I just took a look at one paper this morning. It's Monday morning when I record this. I always ask for 2 pages. People always write more, and I think that's indicative of Deep Woods to Civilization. It's a very simple text, but it's one that I will continue to teach, and I have taught for so many years because it does so many wonderful things with the genre of autobiography, the idea of American Indian intellectualism. It tells a story of what I think is one of the most unique lives for a Native person and a Native intellectual in the 20th century. Charles Eastman was a guy who happened to be sitting in very pivotal places in the history of Santee or Dakota and U.S. relations. As I've said before, what is most unique about this man is the fact that within, he lived to be 80 years old. For those of you who might have done some background information, oddly enough, he lives until 80 years old. He dies penniless. He dies living in a teepee on an island in Detroit, Michigan. And I don't mean to laugh. He catches pneumonia, attempts to start a fire, can't get the fire started, catches pneumonia and dies. He decides, he makes a decision later in his life. He's divorced from his wife, Elaine. And I never say this when we're reading the text, but for those of you who may have done some background information, and I wait until the end to sort of say this because I think I don't want to influence people's reading of the book because I think it's a powerful book to be read on its own. But he divorces his wife. At some point, he and Elaine split up. Right now, I can't think of the exact date. Later in their lives, it's an acrimonious divorce or an acrimonious separation. She winds up with all the original manuscripts of Deep Woods of Civilization, Indian Boyhood. And this guy was a pretty prolific writer for his age. And we lose all the manuscripts to his work. It's never been recovered, never been found. Some say she destroyed it. I don't know. No one's ever been able to look at any of the marginal comments or to see just how much of an editorial role she may have played in his writing. She was certainly a staunch Christian reformer who felt that the best way for Native Americans to survive in the 20th century was for them to adopt Christianity, to assimilate, and become good American agricultural yeoman farmer class people. I think Charles had a different idea. I think he manages to get that across in Deep Woods to Civilization, Indian Boyhood, and the number of other writings that he has. I think we could teach an entire course on Charles Eastman, but we won't. Backing up, he dies in a very lonely way. And I think it's fitting. I think it's so telling that he dies in a city like Detroit, in a city that is so much, in so many ways, represents what is the American story, what is American history. I've never been to Detroit, Michigan. I've only witnessed it through news accounts. I've always wanted to go there for some reason. Maybe that's odd of me, and not so much as a museum piece, but I just see it as this quintessential American sort of place. Maybe I'll get there someday. I haven't gone also because I guess I'm conflicted somewhat on sort of seeing the demise of America, and I've seen the demise of America, so it's not anything new. It's so representative of how we operate as an American society, I think, in that all things are temporary in this country. All things are always changing. All things are always dynamic. So that oftentimes brings me great sadness, but it also brings me an incredible amount of hope, I think. And we'll see what it is going forward. Life is a funny thing. Eastman certainly was a man of his time period. Eastman, in the short expanse of his life, witnessed what it was to have a successful militaristic revolt in the 1862 Dakota conflict. He witnesses what it means to actively, he also witnesses what it means to sort of peacefully revolt in the Ghost Dance Massacre. He also understands what it means to sort of, and I think witnessing these two things, when militarism fails and nonviolent protest fails, he makes a choice, right or wrong, to drive himself into American society, and upon driving himself into American society, establishes or carves out for himself a rhetorical position within that society to lodge scathing critiques of it. And I think that's where he's at in language that as best as he could. By the time he gets to the end of Deep Woods to Civilization, I think that is exactly where he's at. And I think he says, look, you know, for as long as I live, this is what I'm going to be. I am an Indian and I am an American. I'm not an American Indian. I'm an Indian first, and always will be. He's Dakota first, and I think he always will be. But now I'm an American also. The problem is, you know, for all of this civilization, I'm not so sure that you ever had civilization to begin with, and I'm not so sure that the Christian civilization is anything more than a religion, or is anything more than a society based on money, and a society based on commerce. And doing that, I think he provides a pretty scathing critique of capitalist economies, or a critique of capitalist economies and the results of which. And I think that he also, you know, I think his message then is as meaningful today as it was then. Enough about Eastman. We're now going to be turning the page to, we're going to be going in a completely different direction. We're now going to move into a reading of ceremony. We'll read this book for about 2 weeks. It's a collection. It's one of the neatest books I think a Native person has ever put together, in terms of taking on the form of putting things between two paperback covers and putting words in between in print. I don't think Native people have ever taken on the genre available to them in Western literature: autobiography, fiction, short story, memoir, intellectual autobiography, ethnography, autoethnography, which is what I sort of call this text. I don't think they've ever taken on those forms and sort of left them be, haven't sort of uniquely put their stamp of being Native upon them. So we're going to be moving into Leslie Silko's. It's a book that I like to refer to as an autoethnography. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the next couple of weeks, exactly what it means to sort of tell a story of yourself through your ethnicity, tell a story of yourself through not so much like a representation. I don't think we should read this as an ethnographic text necessarily, because it is very much a text of the self and a self within this place. And we're going to be moving rapidly across the 20th century, but we're also going to be, because the book is published in 1980s. 1981 is the original publication. She's Laguna Pueblo, from a place called Laguna, New Mexico now. Laguna Pueblo is Laguna Pueblo. It happens to be located within the boundaries of New Mexico, west of Albuquerque, on your way to Grants and Gallup. If you've never been out on Interstate 40 out that way, I strongly suggest at some point in your life that you get in the car and you drive west on Interstate 40. Preferably, starting in, I don't know, you can start in Oklahoma City, I guess, if you have to pick a place to go. Actually, you should probably start in eastern Oklahoma. You should start at the Cherokee Nation and run west on I-40. For as long as you can till you hit the Pacific Ocean, and you'll see some of the most beautiful country, I think, in the entire world. It's one of the most unique places. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. Every time I drive through there, I feel good about it. And I think what you'll see in these stories by Silko is that she feels good about this part of the world. She will weave together her own autobiography, but she will do it in a very unique and challenging way sometimes. She's going to be telling you short stories. One of the first short stories in the collection, one of the first stories in the collection, after the introductory poems, takes place in Alaska. Go figure. Why would a Laguna person be talking about being in Laguna yet setting a story in Alaska? It's called Storyteller, and it's a powerful, gripping text. I will forewarn you that some of these stories have some pretty strong imagery in them, so be prepared to read some, not overly graphic, but certainly, stories that will make you cringe a little bit. just be prepared to read a wide expanse of genres, short story, old stories from way back, and Laguna understanding of themselves that she's recorded and written down. You see a wide expanse of work. So try to read this work and gain a sense of Leslie Silko, but also gain a sense of what it means to sort of travel in this part of the world. I'll post up later on in the next couple of weeks, I'll post up a collection of her father's photographs. It's also a book that makes extensive use of the medium of photography. Not Silko's photography, but the photography of her father. If you've learned anything from Eastman as it relates to Silko, I would want you to think in this way. That is, American Indian cultures are not static cultures. American Indian cultures, like every other culture in the world, change. They change on a daily basis. Both indigenous and non-indigenous cultures are changing all the time and becoming something different. The United States, for whatever this culture that we may live in here, we will never be the same as we were 10 years ago. I turned 50 years old in December, and I can tell you that I've seen change. We don't always see it on a daily basis, but we certainly see change, and I think there's more and more change that is forthcoming. And as you read Silko, think about the place in which it's set. It's set in a place that's called New Mexico, was once Mexico, was once Spain, was before that Laguna. These people have seen a lot in the 50s. There's archaeological evidence that people have been living in this part of the world for 50,000 years. People don't live in a place for 50,000 years and not change. People don't live in a place for 50,000 years without seeing an awful lot of things go on. And in as much as they can remember those and tell stories about those things, in the end, man, that's all we're left with. That's all we get. It's just those little bits and pieces of story, and we string them together and we try to make sense of our lives in the world in which we live. And we try to maintain some sense of attachment to how we identify culturally and how we identify ethnically, but there's also forces acting upon us that are changing us as well. Eastman was uniquely aware of this, and I think Silko is too. So enjoy the book. I hope you have fun with it. People tend to love it and people tend to hate it, according to Storyteller. Or it's just not always, it's a book. And read around in it, right? You'll be responsible for reading all of it, and we'll talk about all of it. But I think it's a book that sort of defies in some ways. You can read it chronologically. You can read it in the way that it's structured. We can also talk about this book in the way it's structured, because it's not structured like any other book that I've ever sort of read. But just have fun with it. That's all I can say. Any questions, as always, send me an email. Sorry I've gone on way too long here. The last thing I would say, though, is if you're behind in your work, please take this time to get caught up. Don't let the response papers build up and not write them, because you'll flame out on the course in that way, and crash and burn. So get to your work, get it done early. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week. Okay, yeah, watch out.